Welcome back to Morning Express, to our final discussion this morning. My conversation with Chris Hart, relationship expert, and we're all about love in the workplace. Yes, interesting one right there, because so much time most of us spend at work. Almost 70% of our time awake, or when we're actually functioning and not sleeping, is in the workplace, Chris. And therefore, the question that would beg for many people is, are relationships in the workplace appropriate or not? Should we or should we not?
Well, I think if you go back 10, 20 years, everybody said it's terrible. There was supposed to be a separation of work and what have you. But I think the plain fact is it's changed. And I don't think people can stop love at work these days. I mean, the plain fact is that the workplace is 50-50 now.
Yes.
You know, especially areas, professional areas, particularly the media. You know, you name an area, the chances are, except perhaps making cars, you will find 50-50 in the workplace.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's made a big difference is that most of those people are not getting married so early. So they're spending more of their time single, more of their time together. It's just inevitable.
Yeah, and more of the time they'd be spending, as you said, dating or doing, you know, socializing with other people, they're mostly at work. So they just get to interact with this group of people in the workplace.
I mean, there's a ring of inevitability about it too, because you think about it, you know people at work, you trust people at work. Frankly, the HR policies have selected them to fit in, which means they're like you, and before you know it, you just like the people you're with.
Yes.
And it's pretty much inevitable that you're going to fall for somebody there.
Somebody. So when you do fall for somebody in the workplace, what is the best, what next? Do you still treat it as a normal situation when you were not? Because this is a person then you're seeing every other day. This is a person perhaps who sit next to you, or you know, is your boss. I mean, we'll talk about the different dynamics, but how do you handle that?
Well, the first thing is that there is one relationship which is always frowned on at work, and that is, of course, one where there's power involved. You know, if you are dating your boss, everybody is going to disapprove. You're probably going to get fired. You're going to get shifted around, what have you. That is hugely disapproved of, and I think everybody knows why. It's not about the relationship. It's about the politics. You know, you get promoted because you're sleeping with the boss, and nobody will believe that you deserved it. So that's the one you must not do.
So must not ever. I mean, what if you're in love and it's really just meant to be?
If you really, sincerely, honestly believe you're in love with this guy, get another job, move, get him to move, what have you, separate yourselves and take it from there.
Right.
But you will cause mayhem if you actually try to carry on the relationship at work.
All right.
The other thing is that people have differing views of relationships at work depending on what type of relationship they are. I mean, if you are both available and single, then and it looks like you're being sincere, and maybe there's a marriage in the future somewhere, then everybody cheers, everybody thinks it's wonderful.
Yes.
But if they know that you're both married and they both know your spouses, and then, people are very uncomfortable about that.
Yes.
So
and of course,
you've got to be very careful if you're doing
careful.
that.
And there's those whose one party is married, the other one is single. So how then? So for those who are single, you said both of them, it's something that could work out, and everybody's happy. Why? Because it looks like it could really be legit. It's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, not just legitimate, very common. The bulk of people are now meeting their spouses through some facet of work. It doesn't necessarily have to be the guy sitting next to you in accounts, but you're likely to meet people through work that you're likely to marry sooner or later. Okay,
so let's focus a little bit more on those people, the single two individuals that have met at work, they like each other, and they start to date. So the thing here is, one of the beautiful things about when a relationship is getting started is to get to learn more about this person. So of course at work you already know them quite a bit, I mean, because you've been interacting, and you see this person all the time. So then how do you still make this a relationship that's special, that's still, because when you have too much of something, it can get boring.
Yeah, I think there's a different dynamic to relationships that start at work, and that makes them, to be blunt, exciting in its own right. The first point is that, of course, the initial contact, if you like, at work is much more difficult because everybody's watching and you know everybody. It's not like meeting in a strange place amongst strangers where you can make a few mistakes and get away with it. What tends to happen at work is that people are much more cautious about starting the relationship. I mean, they usually go through stages, if you like. You know, you suddenly realize you actually quite fancy the guy in accounts.
Yes.
And so you don't say a word, but you start dressing a little better and you start hanging around where you know he's going to pass by and you start hoping that he will notice. And that can get quite exciting. And so people go through that phase, and then of course they do eventually meet in some way, and typically in a sort of slightly more social setting, like an office party or maybe in the canteen. And again, there's going to be a delicate little fencing match.
Or out of town assignment.
That's right. But yes, you can see what I'm leading to. You can't just walk up to somebody at work and say, hey, I fancy you, because everybody's watching and you feel very foolish. So people are much more cautious about those opening moves, and they might go on for quite a while, in fact.
So after it is, because it will be interesting. It will be one of those interesting chase, but it happens for some. Finally, they meet, they agree, they're now dating. After that, Chris, doesn't it get boring? Because then you'll see this person every day.
But I mean, in practice, people don't fall for the person sitting in the desk next to them. They tend to find somebody a little bit further away, and they tend to stay very professional about it, you know, because there's a sort of set of rules, if you like, about how you do a dating situation at work. For example, you don't start calling each other cuddly names at work, and you start...
Baby!
People act as if they're two individuals at work. And they know they have to because everybody's watching. So they do that, and then of course they rush out of work and have a good time in the evening. To be honest, it's quite exciting.
Yes, it is, but I'm thinking about those who, because that is perhaps what would be the best way to go about it, which so you don't feel like this person is all over your space. But there are those who will even have PDA, public display of affection, you know, and they'll come and they want to drop this huge kiss on you. They want to walk around holding hands in the office.
But not at work. You see, people actually discourage you doing that quite strongly. You know, you start noticing people looking at you, and so you very swiftly fit into the general rules, which are be professional at work. You know, in much the same way as there are unwritten rules about what you wear at work, there are also unwritten rules about how you interact with people you're fond of at work. And so the basic rule is you're two independent professionals at work, even though secretly, you know, whenever your eyes meet. The thing you've got to bear in mind is that people really do watch you at work. People are hypersensitive to the possibility of relationships, and every little tiny bit of body language will give you away. And you know what they say, gossip travels faster than light. The whole place will know instantly, and you will kid yourself that you're keeping it a secret. It's not a secret.
And for some it will work out, Chris. They will get to the place where they want to get married and all. When for some couples it gets to a point when they actually want to be in different working places, what kind of conversation should they be having in terms of who gets to be the one to move? Because there's some, they really want their relationship to work out, but the challenge of just being in the same space and perhaps a bit interference from everybody and gossip in you know, the same company can get weighty for some couples. So in those instances, how do you decide who makes the move?
You know, I don't think there's a standard answer for that. I think by the time you've got to the point where you recognize that the relationship is important, you should be just like any other relationship and start talking about your future and your career plans and whether or not you're going to get married and where you're going to live and all those sorts of things. And it just falls into that general pattern. And so you start discussing your careers together in that context. We are together, but my career maybe ought to take me into another organization or something like that. You just talk about it normally.
What if it's one who's wanting you to move?
Well, you know, if you find yourself in a relationship where you're being pushed around a little bit, then probably you don't want to be in that relationship.
So if the partner is asking,
you don't want to go there.
And for those who date, happy days, everybody gets to find out, Sophia and so are together, and then after a few months, nasty breakup. and you're so pissed, but you still have to see this person at work. So work becomes this very toxic place where you think you're seeing him coming down the corridor and you want to do an about turn before you meet. How do you handle then breakups also then?
Well, the best medicine actually, of course, is prevention. And fortunately, people are getting quite sophisticated about this. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people delay marriage nowadays. That's quite common, and it's resulted in a different dating pattern. People date much more casually when they're younger, and so they are likely to have, how shall I put it, slightly less connected dating relationships, not so intense. It can get very physical, but there isn't the intensity that there would be if you thought this person was going to marry you and it all falls down. So what tends to happen nowadays is that people go through a phase of, I know this sounds awful, but you have a lot of women who now date like men used to. You know, they choose the men because they look nice and they just want a nice physical time with them for a while, and they're quite happy to say goodbye at the end of it. Now, when you've done that for 2 or 3 years, you get very good at figuring out how to deal with a relationship that's going to end. So, for example, one of the things that's very common is that people deliberately choose people from within the organization, but where their paths don't cross too much, because they are actually thinking ahead and thinking, when this ends, I don't want to be meeting this guy every single day.
Yeah, but there's still Christos who find themselves with the people in the same pot.
Oh yes, yes, it happens. And of course, if you like, that is the single biggest reason for not doing it. Yeah. Because that is utterly painful. If you've got really serious with somebody and it has failed and you share an office, that is going to be horrible. Yeah. And in fact, it usually goes through a very unpleasant phase where you're bringing your disputes from home into the office. Of course, strictly speaking, a total no-no, but it happens all the time.
Yeah, it does.
And if you start to realize that that's happening to you, you've got some serious decisions ahead.
Yeah, ahead. And there are companies who have policies in as far as it's concerned. You know, you've talked about the unspoken rule, but there are some that are very, it's clearly enumerated that this is a rule. There should not be relations between colleagues.
I mean, you're quite right. A lot of companies do have policies like that, but in practice they're hard to enforce. They're hard to enforce for the simple reason that a good proportion of the population of the company will be in relations like that. You can't fire everybody. So in practice, people turn a blind eye. Things have got to be really serious before they start quoting from policies. The only exception to that, as I say, is where power is involved. But in general, most companies have learned that it's not a good idea to get involved. Yeah. To be truthful, I mean, most relationships at work are, dare I say it, good for the company. People actually are much more fired up, they're much more motivated, they're on their best behavior, they're dressing better, they're working. They want to be at work. You're dead right. So in practice, it's a good idea to let these things go on.
Okay. And then away from those who, you know, will have a relationship single, it's also a place where partners who are having issues with their other halves at home would find an escape at work with somebody else who is easier, lovely to talk to. They have a few things in common.
I mean, you're dead right. And I suppose in a sense it's utterly inevitable, isn't it? Because if you are having a hard time at home, who better to talk to about it than somebody you meet every day at work? And you already know them, and you already know quite a lot about them, and you probably already know just a bit about their personal life, and so you tend to choose somebody who's going to be sympathetic. And before you know it, you're actually starting down a little slippery slope. You're talking about things that, frankly, you shouldn't be talking about at work. And before you know it, you're beginning to feel really quite close to that person. And so you're starting what is usually called, I'm not even sure what the right term should be, but it's a sort of affair, but it's utterly about emotions at that stage. An emotional affair, let's call it that. The problem with it, of course, is that you kid yourself that it's perfectly okay because there's no sex involved. But of course, actually, you're heading towards it. And sooner or later, you're going to be talking together about things you won't tell your wife you're talking
about.
And then you've definitely crossed over the line.
Okay. How do you guard from that happening? Because it's, as you said, there is that aspect of it that will be very interesting. You know, at the beginning, when it's just this person who is not stressing you up, they just make life easier. They'll even help you with work and just be good to talk to. And so it will grow slowly, step by step by step. And inevitably, or at some point, boom, it's happened. But for many, it's not something they went out seeking.
Oh, invariably not.
Yeah.
I mean, I think 99.9% of these start with just, oh gosh, I had a rough time last night, you know, and you're talking.
Yeah.
But it has an inevitable progression about it. You know, the conversations get deeper, people start drinking more coffee, lunch breaks start getting longer, and then before you know it, you know, a project has ended and you're all having a drink after work. Then I think, you know, you're in real danger. I think the thing you've got to do is ask yourself constantly, can I tell my spouse what I'm doing? Okay. And the moment you have a conversation or a long lunch hour where you say to yourself, I don't think I'm going to tell husband, wife when I get home about this, then you know you've actually slipped over into that area, that grey area. And if you don't do something about it at that point, the results are inevitable.
So it's always that checking whether you've gone overboard.
And the issue is, can I tell? If I can tell with a straight face what I was doing, then it's fine. And if you can't, then it isn't fine.
But then there are those, you know, husbands, wives who'll just have a problem, whether it was just innocent lunch from the very beginning, and so you don't tell them because they'll just have issues. They're very insecure.
But you see, that almost defines a relationship that's in trouble.
Okay.
I ought to be able to go home every day and tell my wife everything that's happened in my day and feel quite relaxed about it, knowing that not only will she be interested, but she won't be judgmental and we won't have a row about any of it. She'll just find it very amusing and we'll have a good time.
And perhaps at some point meet the person.
Even so, yeah, absolutely. But if I can't do that, then you're more or less saying, I've actually got a problem in this relationship. I've got things I can't talk about. I've got people I can't talk about. Now, the flip side of that is I'm getting closer and closer to somebody at work. Well, like I say, the results are inevitable.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Our time is up, but we appreciate you talking to us today about love at work. One of those sometimes inevitable, as you said, but it's all about how you handle it and see how it plays out for each individual situation. Thank you for coming this morning.
Pleasure.
We appreciate it.